Scene layout is the process of setting up a scene in 3D, and it usually means importing objects and positioning them in a larger context. And that's what I've done here. I've got a scene already laid out with a lot of objects. I'm going to use that to demonstrate the most important principle, the very first thing that you need to master with scene layout, which is scale. The size of the world and the size of objects is super important, especially when you get to physical materials and lighting. You can't expect good results if the objects are not scaled properly. It's strongly advised that you model everything to unity scale or 1-to-1 scale. In other words, the object in the 3D scene is measured the same as it would be in the real world. If you have a scene open and you don't know the scale of objects, there's an old trick to find that out by just basically building a box. Let's go to the Create panel, to Geometry, Standard Primitives, click the Box button, and in the Creation panel rollout, set that to Cube. Open up the keyboard entry rollout, set the length to 36, and click Create. And we get a cube at the origin because we left our X, Y, and Z values at 0. With that box still selected, let's go over to the Modify panel. We see length, width, and height displayed as 36 units, but there is no unit of measurement displayed. By default, we're seeing generic units. I've set this scene up to emulate the way 3ds Max operates by default. What is a generic unit? It's an internal system unit, and it determines the accuracy of spatial calculations. And by default, a system unit is actually an inch. But Max allows us to display and enter distance values in other units, such as centimeters or feet, regardless of the system units. Let's look into our unit setup. In the Customize menu, choose Unit Setup. In this dialog box, we have the Display Unit Scale section, and it's currently set to Generic Units. To demonstrate that generic units are actually inches by default, I'm going to switch the display unit scale over to US Standard, and from the pull-down list here, choose decimal inches. When I click OK, over here in the Modify panel, the values didn't change. It's still saying 36, but now we have a little inch symbol, which is a double quote. The values didn't change because a generic unit is an inch by default. And also, of course, the size of objects didn't change. We just changed the units of measurement. Okay, so that's how generic units work. You will almost always want to explicitly set your display units per scene. Let's go back into the unit setup. And let's look a little bit more deeply at US standard units. You can choose feet or inches. If you choose feet, such as feet with decimal inches, then additionally you have the ability to choose a default unit, either feet or inches. And this determines how 3ds Max will interpret your data entry. In other words, if default units are set to feet and you type in a 1, 3ds Max will interpret that as 1 foot. If default units are inches and you type in a 1, 3ds Max interprets that as 1 inch. I'll choose inches as the default units and click OK. Over in the Modify panel, we now see values displayed in feet and inches, 3 feet and 0 inches. Our default units are inches, so if I go into the height field and type in a value of 60 and press Enter, Max interprets that as 60 inches or 5 feet. We can also explicitly type in foot or inch symbols to override the keystroke interpretation of default units. So I can go back to that height field, type in a 3 and then a single quote and press Enter, and Max directly applies that value of 3 feet. I'm going to use the metric system with centimeters throughout most of this course so that the scenes will be compatible with international audiences. If you're an architect or interior designer working in the United States, you'll probably use US Standard, but otherwise I'd recommend using the metric system. I'll go back into the unit setup and set the display unit scale to metric with centimeters chosen in the pull-down list, and click OK. And now our values are displayed in centimeters. Again, the size of the object did not change. We're merely measuring it with a different system. And that means we'll have no problem if we share this scene with someone who prefers to work in different units. And of course, I can type in values here to make this cube exactly 1 cubic meter. I can set the length to 100, press Tab, width to 100, press Tab, and height 100, and press Enter. Now that box is exactly 1 cubic meter. That's how to set up the display units or units of measurement in a scene.